My guest today is Professor Gregory Forth, who is Emeritus Professor of Anthropology at the University of Alberta and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. His most recent book is Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid. Welcome, Gregory.
Oh, pleased to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. So I got some of your materials, a paper from Anthropology Today, a reasonably recent paper,
Hmm.
and I got a chapter from the book, as
Hmm.
well as the book review. And so I was going to start with the paper, and just to
Hmm.
set the context, we're going to talk about sort of a hypothesized hominoid who might be still there in an
Hmm.
island in Indonesia, island called Flores. I'm going to talk a little bit about it geographically, where it is located, and its sort of demographics and so on. And then we'll get to the details of it. To set the context, I was looking at the sort of the conclusions of the paper, and you say here, I will confess that intuitively, the current survival of a descendant of Homo
Hmm.
floresiensis also seems improbable to me, even though it provides the most parsimonious explanation for what Flores Islanders say about ape men and their resemblance to the fossil hominin. Um, so we also have some fossil evidence for it, but we don't have any photographic evidence for it. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, talk a little bit about Flores to start with.
Flores Island, it's one of the lesser Sunda Islands in Indonesia. It's just northwest of Timor, which I suspect is a better known island. So it's in the southwestern part of Indonesia. It's about, what, 400 kilometers long. I forget the area, but it's very mountainous for the most part. The population, human population today is, I think, about 2 million.
2 million. Okay.
Most people live on or near the coast,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, uh, partly because it is mountainous, but there are nevertheless people living, small villages in the interior as well. Most people live towards the western end of the island, which in a region called Manggarai, which is where the remains of Homo floresiensis were found back in late 2003.
And it's a tropical forest, I would imagine, right?
Yes, yes, large. Yeah, there are areas of savanna, but yeah, a mountain forest or jungle,
Mountain
as it's
forest.
often called. Yeah.
And the reason people are living by the water, are they typically fishermen? Is that how they make a living?
Yes, indeed, that you would find a lot of fishing among. I mean, nowadays with the development of towns, you have modern occupations as well, of course. But yeah, a lot of fishermen, but also traditionally agriculturalists. For the most part, some areas are very well watered, heavy and annual rainfall. And for some time now, 100 years or more, wet rice, irrigated rice has been cultivated. But yeah, looking back in time a bit, people again traditionally did hunt and gather wild foods as well as cultivating and raising livestock and fishing, of course.
So the visible part of contemporary population of 2 million, they are closer to the shores.
Hmm.
And so does that mean that there isn't lot of contact to the mountainous, very foresty area from the contemporary people?
Yeah. Well, you'd find some high mountain forests where people very rarely go. So yeah, I mean these parts of the island would be less familiar to most people, certainly the great majority of people, than places closer to the coast or in more lowland areas generally.
So that makes a little, so just like I think parts of Brazil where there are a lot of places inside the country where the Aborigines live, and there are, I understand there are villages that have never ever had any other contact with humans.
Few
And I
still now.
suppose things like that is possible here too, right? Given the geography.
Yeah, although less so because the island isn't nearly as large as Brazil or even Amazonia or yeah, parts of Brazil to which your description applies.
And so talk about the species. So you already mentioned the archaeological find on the western part of the
Mhm.
island.
Yeah.
I understand that it was in a cave. What did you find?
Well, I wasn't involved in the excavation, of course. My interest is in local people nowadays and stories, reports, anecdotes, if you like, that they tell about encounters with something that, by all indications, looks very much like the reconstruction of Homo floresiensis. But Homo floresiensis, the finds, and there are the remains of I think about 13 different individuals in this one large cave or rock shelter. Whether the skeletal remains or all of them were actually buried or died simply inside the cave, or whether some weren't washed in from outside, I think still remains a question. Although again, I'll remind you, this isn't specifically my
Sure,
area
sure.
of interest or expertise. Yeah.
So do you remember or do you know the age? What was the age of the specimen?
Yeah, well, I would remind everyone that we're talking about a single site for this
Yeah.
species. Um, we can be sure they lived elsewhere on Flores Island, which is reasonably big, but that their remains have only been found at this one site. A great interest, or part of the terrific interest in the find back in 2004, late 2004, when it was first announced, was the date that was estimated. It was very recent. It was about 11, 12,000
Hmm.
years ago, which certainly overlaps with anatomically modern humans. But that was well among the paleoanthropologists themselves, the archaeologists and so on. That was they weren't too happy with that, um, you might say, and so there was a restudy done, and that has put the date back somewhat. It's been determined that a more likely age would be 50 to 60,000 years ago instead of
Six six zero 60.
60, yeah, 60,000 or 50,000. Even so, I would stress that geologically this is very recent, and certainly overlaps with the time that there were modern humans like us in Indonesia, as elsewhere, of course.
And I understand their height is a lot shorter than modern humans. So, but
Yeah,
sort of the dimensionality of the specimen.
yeah. No, this is another great surprise. These hominins, to give them the correct term, were very, very small, about just over a meter in height. So you're talking about something over 3 feet. Much smaller than any normal humans alive nowadays. Also, they, unlike pygmies, for example, so-called pygmies, whose heads tend to be, as large as anyone else's. This hominin, Homo floresiensis, the type specimen, had a very small, had a head in proportion to the body size, even small by that standard, because by that measure, because the brain, again,
Mm.
yet another surprise, was around 40 cubic centimeters, the cranial capacity,
Mm.
which is extremely small
Mm.
for, for a member of the genus Homo, anyway.
Yeah.
As I say, it's comparable to an Australopithecine, if that means anything to your viewers. And generally speaking, the physical features are suggestive of something very much older than 50, 60,000 years ago. I mean, going back
Mm.
a million or millions of years, and yet clearly Floresiensis was contemporaneous with modern humans for some time, and because there've been no further discoveries of Floresiensis remains, we're stuck with the dates for that single
Mm.
site. So we don't know. It became extinct sometime after that date, but how long after we don't know.
Is the Australopithecus frame is also shorter compared to modern human?
Yes, yes.
About the same
Afarensis or
dimensionality, or
about comparable indeed to again my memory doesn't serve me well because I know this kind of thing only from textbooks, but Australopithecus would have been about the same height as Floresiensis, and similar cranial capacity and so on.
I know that we have been looking for this missing link for a long time. Does this fit that description in some way?
There's some philosophical problems with a missing link. I think partly because it suggests, kind of a single sequence, a single line of descent or evolution from the more physically primitive to us, basically, if we're talking about humans. So, whereas what we've learned, and we've especially learned from the discovery of Homo floresiensis is that our family tree is very bushy. That is to say, you have a lot of branches appearing contemporaneously at the same time, like Homo sapiens and Homo floresiensis, despite the great physical differences between them.
And obviously, only one sample, as you say, and we had no evidence for anything, the other islands around it in Indonesia, right? Just Flores.
Yeah, no, people have been looking. Paleontologists have been looking. In the Philippines, however, on the big island of Luzon, after discovery of Floresiensis, um, uh, remains were discovered which have been dubbed Luzonensis, Homo Luzonensis after the island. And those, if memory serves correct, they're about the same time as this Manggarai date. I mentioned the single site for Floresiensis, something over 60,000, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, between 60 and 70,000. Also, and again, subsequent to Floresiensis, you had excavation in a place whose name is translated as Red Deer Cave in southern China.
Hmm.
I believe it's southern China, certainly China. Again, of another small-bodied hominin. So yeah, discoveries happen all the time. And of course, they shall we say, completely change or tend to completely change the overall picture. It's rather like a jigsaw puzzle where you start off with only a few bits, so
Hmm.
you, a very incomplete picture of things, and then as you find one or two more bits, the picture becomes more complete. But by the same token, the picture changes, from our earlier understanding of in this case, hominin evolution.
Do we know anything about their diet? I know that modern technology now allows us to model
Mhm.
jaws and finite element methods and other mathematical techniques to
Yeah.
try to figure out how they crushed food and what kind of food they might have eaten. Do we have some hypotheses around what their diet might have been?
Yeah, indeed. Floresiensis' diet was mainly vegetarian, mainly plants. They may have been, yeah, more or less exclusively vegetarian plant eaters, which is indicated by the size, relative size of the jaw. The teeth, of course, are important. There has been some speculation that they may have hunted or at least scavenged off remains of dwarf stegodons, as yeah, a kind of early primitive elephant.
Hmm.
Now extinct, and indeed there was more than one species of stegodon on Flores Island.
Hmm.
Again, this was discovered back, the Stegodons were discovered back in the 1950s, and before that time, it was believed that there were no such large animals anywhere east of Wallace's line, Bali particularly, whereas, Flores is a good bit east of that line. So that was another complete surprise for
Hmm.
this. For the island of Flores. But getting back to Floresiensis, uh, yeah, whether they hunted, whether they even had stone tools
Hmm.
is not certain. I
That's
just point out, by the way, that in Southeast Asia, with bamboo growing everywhere, you don't really need stone tools in the same way as you would have in Pleistocene Europe,
hmm.
for example, or North America. So yeah, I mean, you would need some stone technology, but anything to work bamboo, which is relatively easy to work, would be suitable to make a projectile point of some sort, and with fire. Um, One thing I should say about fire is that we're not certain either whether Floresiensis ever had or used fire.
Hmm.
Yeah, the evidence is unclear. But if you did have fire, then you can harden bamboo points so they become very effective as weapons.
So we don't really have the bones don't allow us to do any sort of genomic analysis, right? We need soft tissue for that, I would imagine.
Um, yeah. There has been, so far as I know, no genomic analysis of Floresiensis. All indications, though, are that it is a hominin that is very different, physically very primitive in
Hmm.
relation to Homo sapiens. I guess there's also a question of if they were there at the same time, whether they could have interbred. We don't know, but I would certainly say
Hmm.
it's not a certainty that would have happened. Yeah.
What's sort of the strongest argument to put them in the Homo bucket? Um, can we can we
That
claim that?
is, that's interesting because there was, in the beginning, among the discovery team, there was a disagreement over this. I guess one of the chief physical anthropologists, a man called, and anatomist indeed, a man called Peter Brown, argued that the Parisiensis shouldn't be included in the Homo genus.
Yeah.
And he called it Sundanthropus, I believe,
Hmm.
which yeah, incorporates the name Sunda, which is that chain of islands, both well, virtually the main chain of islands in Indonesia. Others argued for Homo. I'm still not entirely clear what the criteria were. Um, there was even the claim that the recent date was a reason to include it in Homo, which I can't quite see there. But yeah, again, controversy.
Yeah, and so in your paper and the book, you're talking about sort of a compendium of data. Let's not call it evidence yet, a compendium of data. Part of it is physical, like we talked about already.
Mhm.
Um, and we have no evidence of fire, which is a little bit surprising, isn't it? I mean, if they were really living in the cave, they probably need fire, don't they?
Well, they weren't necessarily living in a cave. If you introduce the hominoids that recent people on Flores claim that they've recently seen, then it's commonly mentioned that the figures were hairy,
Mm.
somewhat hairy, body hair we're talking about. At the same time, the head hair apparently wasn't that long, so there wasn't that much of a distinction between head and body hair. But nevertheless, the bodies were hairy, according to what they say, probably hairier than the average European or Middle Easterner. Indeed, I mean, it has been argued that we lost our hair because of fire, not because it was burned off, but because with fire you were able to keep warm, and hair wasn't
It's also dangerous.
such an adaptive factor. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wouldn't apply so much, of course, in tropical places, but nevertheless, it is something to consider. But no, fire among humans. Well, now I tell you, when I was at school, which was a very long time ago, the first development of fire use was attributed to Homo erectus, and I think that's probably still the case. I'd have to check on that one, but if correct, then of course Australopithecus, which in some ways are comparable, evidently to Floresiensis, wouldn't have had fire either. So yeah, hominins don't necessarily need to have fire, depending on where they live, what they're eating, and so on.
So the other part of another bucket of data that you used are the stories of the
Yeah.
islanders, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know much about Indonesia and much about Flores specifically, but do they have different languages on the island among the two main people?
Yes, indeed. There are a number of different languages, even different language families are represented there. So it's yeah, linguistically quite diverse, as is the whole of Indonesia, or most of it, at uh, at any rate.
And the stories that you gathered, they those stories are not concentrated in one location, right? I mean, they're coming from all types of people with different
Uh-huh.
languages and different, potentially different cultures and
Yeah,
and all of that.
yeah. Although the stories, well, the stories I collected, which include alleged sightings of these creatures called Laihoa, by the way, in the Leo language,
Mm.
come from the area called Leo in the east central part of the island. But no, stories of basically the same sort of creature are found all over Flores, as you might expect if they survived into modern times.
So the stories are indicating they were everywhere, meaning that there are large number of them.
Well, not necessarily a large number. I mean, or at least not at present. I mean, how many there may
Yeah,
have
yeah.
been in the past, we don't know. But yeah, there are suggestions from the stories that the same sort of hominoid,
Mm.
small-bodied hominoid, was found or is found in various parts of the island. But as I say, in relation to my studies in the central part of Flores, mostly, and the eastern or east central parts, that then yeah, the story is particularly interesting with regard to Leo. That they should be the group that most clearly state that there are a few, not many, but a few.
Mm.
Of these ape men, as I call them, around. It's interesting that their region is particularly mountainous in relation to some others, and indeed the stories I collected, which sound like quite credible sighting reports of something
Mm.
that the locations of these were higher up in yeah, mountainous, more elevated regions.
So in the paper, you say, Gregory, regional explanations. You say there are other interpretations of the stories as Aboriginal Formosans and most Indonesians,
Hmm.
including Flores Islanders, speak distinctly related languages, all
Hmm.
classified as Austronesian.
Yeah.
And the dwarfs and the ape men could reflect cultural affinity rather than experiences
Hmm.
of similar empirical realities.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, you're referring to. I know now that the chapter I sent you from, not from my book Between Ape and Human, but from a
It's also
collection
in the book.
of
It's
essays.
also, I mean, it's also
It's
in
also,
the
also
paper.
a book, yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
one paper of mine in that book. Yeah, well, this is something else that's attracted my interest considerably recently. Is the fact that on Taiwan, Formosa, you have for the longest time had local people telling stories about small-bodied, dark-skinned aboriginals living in mountainous regions, living as hunter-gatherers. And so on. At the same time, these stories do certainly, many of them contain fantastic elements, um, such as these creatures having tails, or being able to live underwater, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, in terms of the physical descriptions, it's for a long time been suggested that. This could reflect the presence of negritos
Yeah.
on the island. Negritos, a Spanish word meaning a small, dark-skinned person. And indeed, people labeled as Negrito, not everybody likes the term, but nevertheless, kind of stuck with it. Negritos are also found on the Malay Peninsula in western Indonesia, which of course is adjacent, Western Malaysia, I should say, which of course
Yeah.
is adjacent to Indonesia, and also in the Philippines, including Luzon Island, also in the Andaman Islands, off the coast of what Myanmar, Northern Malaya, that region. But no, with regard to Formosa, there were nobody could prove there'd ever been Negritos on Formosa that might be reflected in these stories. However, just a couple of years ago, we had excavations and analysis of remains which show fairly conclusively, and there's also always room for doubt, in archaeology as in other kinds of anthropology, Um, these were a Negrito type. In fact, there was one skull in particular which was very closely matched. A female skull, closely matched female skulls from Negritos in Luzon,
Yeah.
and other bones, other skeletal materials indicated that you had you're dealing with very short-bodied individuals. So the consensus now is that the stories basically reflect interaction between agriculturalists
Mm.
um, who ultimately came from China, usually 6,000 years ago, I think it's, or more, 8,000 years ago, it's estimated. When these Negritos, for most Negritos, were already there, had been there for a long time. This the stories reflected, interaction between them in the telling and retelling of stories among the Formosans, of course. Various kind of mythical themes became added. My one interest of mine in all this was that the kinds of stories that are told, with some fantastic elements, about the Formosans, apparently Formosan Negritos, the dwarfs as they're called,
Mm.
are similar or the same as the kinds of themes, kinds of storylines that you find uh, in um, in stories in various parts of Indonesia. Some of them relate to Negritos, as in West Malaysia, but the rest refer not to Negritos but to other kinds of human-like beings, you
Mm.
might say, and included in the comparisons are stories from Sumba, very closely similar to
Mm.
the Formosan parallels. There are also stories from Borneo, where you have the same story but applied not to Negritos, but to monkeys, indeed.
Mm.
So the subject of the story shifts slightly, but the overall
Mm.
story is the same. So, which is not to say that there isn't some basis in truth, if you will, to the stories, but like any kind of a story, including ones we might classify as factual, there tends to be a way of telling things, which is
Yes.
precedes the specific story or report or whatever. And so it applies into scientific papers, but I'm getting a bit off the topic, maybe. But yeah, no, that was the what I was talking about in that paper. Focused very much on the Formosan Negritos. The book, which you evidently haven't seen, does indeed consider other possibilities.
Mm.
Besides the ape men, as I call them, following a local usage, by the way. Um,
Just one quick thing, Gregory.
yeah.
So, just for my own clarification, the timing difference between the Taiwanese Negritos and the
Mhm.
Homo
Yeah.
floresiensis um, should tell us, or does it tell us they are different species altogether? Just a
Oh, I
timing
think there's
difference.
no doubt about that. From the time aside, from the remains, yeah. As I said, the Formosan skeleton is and the cranium especially are very comparable to the physical appearance, physical form of Negritos that are living still now in Luzon in the Philippines. So they're fully Homo sapiens.
Mm.
There's no question about that. Whereas Floresiensis is a different species, and maybe even a different genus, as we were discussing just a while ago.
Yeah. You say here, I mean, this is more a philosophical question. Yeah, you say here it is now accepted that Homo sapiens has shared the Earth with two or more other species of Homo
Mhm.
several times in our evolutionary past,
Yes,
and there is no biological reason why they should not do so even at present,
that's right.
despite the philosophical difficulty many have with conceiving of
Yeah,
such
yeah,
coexistence. Yeah. So,
yeah. And I do. I mean, well, we anthropologists tend to be a bit eclectic. You might say a bit fraudulent insofar as we're allowed to go all over the place. But no, the philosophical or epistemological philosophy of science, philosophy of knowledge side of things in all this interests me considerably. And that's one thing I wanted to bring out, for example, in the anthropology today. Article. Even archaeologists, paleontologists who nowadays accept this bushy model for the human
yeah.
family tree, many branches growing at the same time. I've shown, well, in the book Between Ape and Human, there
Yeah.
still is this kind of inherent bias towards seeing things in a rather linear
Mm.
um, fashion. And well, I mean, that's a general view which has been around a long time in biology as well as paleontology, and which, goes back to various features of Western thought over the last several centuries, not the least of which is Darwinian evolution,
Mm.
the original version, which tends to be very progressive and, so that one species always replaces another, you might say,
Mm.
rather than perhaps growing out of another and both continuing together for a period of time. So yeah, I think, well, I think simply the discovery of Homo floresiensis, just talk about the fossil, has considerably has encouraged us to rethink a few quite basic
Mm.
uh, aspects of the way we look at and explain things.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
as you know, in science, it's often very difficult to fight against the establishment or the
mm,
established ideas.
mm.
Um, Uh, so I was just thinking when you were talking, Gregory, do we have any connection to the Australian Aborigines with either the Negritos or Frisians?
Um, well, the Negritos, yeah. Um, Insofar as but both Negritos and the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians were among the first to leave Africa
Yeah.
in the most recent mass movement out and to move into Asia and Europe and well eventually throughout the world. What are the current dates for Australian Aborigines? I believe about 60,000 years ago, which would be when they reached the island continent.
Yeah.
And Negrito seemed to go back, about the same
Mm.
age. So they were contemporary, although of course Australian Aborigines are much larger than
Yeah.
Negrito. Negritos, there's a definition of pygmy, which is the more general term.
Mm.
Negritos included in pygmies, and that is that an average male height shouldn't exceed 1.5 meters, which is what 4 foot something. So that's yeah. Um,
But you
well,
mentioned, sorry to interrupt, but you
well,
mentioned the pygmy skull is sort of proportional to the body,
yes, indeed.
whereas the
Well, yeah.
Frisian is different, right? It is much smaller head.
Well, the Floresiensis, that is, but not Negritos
Not
or
Negritos, okay.
Australian Aborigines. No, no, they're the same as any human in that respect. Yeah, the Floresiensis is as I say, small. So the small-headed. So the cranial capacity was only 400 cc's, which is about a third of that of a modern human, and indeed about the same size as a chimpanzee's brain.
Mm.
So.
I'm sure you are aware of this. So I remember this was several years ago. National Geographic used to run a program called Journey of Man,
Mhm,
and this was based on biologist Spencer Wells' work that basically sort of using your saliva. It basically tells you with human migratory path
mhm,
you might have been part of.
yeah.
And the first migratory path, the data sort of drawn out as out of Africa into the Middle East, into India,
Mhm,
all around India, into Indonesia, and they end up in Australia.
mhm,
So this is sort of the first Homo sapien long trip from Africa to Australia.
yeah.
So I would imagine, as you were saying, the bushy sort of evolutionary context, people who are sort of left in that journey might have evolved differently,
Mhm,
even though they may all have had some, similar starting point
yeah.
potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, yes. I mean that's possible. I mean, it's been suggested, for example, that the Negritos in Southeast Asia, including the Andaman Islands, um, and now Taiwan, Formosa, of course, they're not all descendants of the same group of ancestors, and indeed, it's been argued that their physical features, including dark skin, frizzy hair, and so on, are local adaptations
Mm.
to similar environments in quite different places. Um, now, I would say that most evidence doesn't support that. Even I should underline that even if that had happened, so
Mm.
they just they're a convergence. Um, Even if that has happened, that they're still Homo sapiens sapiens. So
Mm.
they're not different species or subspecies. Um, yeah. So I forget what the original question was
No,
there,
no,
but
yeah. So clearly they are different species. I don't know if that's the right term, but they're clearly different. They could have been sort of mixing between them, I would imagine, because
oh,
Homo sapiens were
that's
contemporarily there, right, at the same time.
yeah. That's another point that I was going to make, and you could put it this way: that one reason we haven't seen the evolution of new species of Homo since the out of Africa movement is because different groups, different lines, if you will, have indeed intermarried, and it is generally accepted, I think, with regard to Negritos, that in Southeast Asia, in this region, that at one time you would likely have had them in many places, if not everywhere, whereas now they're just what three main locations,
Mm.
maybe four now with Formosa among living Negritos. Just the three locations, including the Andaman Islands. That what's happened everywhere else where they were or might have been is that they have indeed intermarried, interbred, if you will, or less happily that they edged out by larger bodied Homo sapiens, not necessarily deliberately exterminated, but out competited, as they say. So they haven't been able to, groups haven't been able to maintain themselves as a genetic isolate. That's
It,
the thing.
yeah, it's interesting, um, could we say they got incorporated in some ways into Homo
Oh, yes,
sapiens? I
indeed.
know that there was a big debate before. People really resisted the idea that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred, and now
Oh,
we
yes.
have clear genetic evidence that was the
Oh,
case.
yes. Yes.
We are all carrying up to 5% of Neanderthal genes. Um, and so, given in that context, I guess we can't really make any genomic conclusions here in terms of interbreeding because we don't really have their genome, right?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say with regard to negritos on Luzon Island in the Philippines is that it has recently been shown that they have some Denisovan
Mm.
mixture, which is found indeed among other groups in that part of the world, Melanesia and New Guinea and so on. But that seems to distinguish them from lowland Filipinos, in larger-bodied and
Mm.
later arriving Filipinos. So yeah, no, it's fascinating. We're still at a very early age. It seems to early stage. It seems to me in this regard. I mean, the Denisovans. Again, what exactly they are or were, we don't know very much about that.
Mm.
Um, they yeah, no, this is a recent discovery that you had this distinct type. Interbreeding apparently with Neanderthals as well as anatomically modern humans, including, as I say, Melanesians and Negritos. But in my book, to get back to that, and these images reported by local people,
Mm.
um, creatures that they say they've seen, I argued against the Negrito hypothesis. I mean, for one thing, there's no evidence for Negritos on Flores, no evidence yet. At any rate, the descriptions are quite different. The Negrito features, dark and frizzy hair especially, don't accord with what local people say about the Laihoa or ape men. Some of them say they've seen. For another thing, being human beings, Negritos would have interacted in some way with other humans. If they were definitely there through trade, intermarriage we've mentioned, and so on.
So in conclusion, Gregory, we're running out of time. So would you say this is sort of a different type of, I'm just making this up, Gregory, I know nothing about
Hmm.
this. Different type of evolution. So there is X and there is Y. The Darwinian view is that if X wins, Y loses, the X gets selected, X goes on to X prime and X double prime and so on, and Y completely gets out of the picture.
Hmm.
Um, there might be a different type of evolution in which X basically incorporates Y
Hmm.
into its structure. And over time, it's not by systematic elimination, but over time, there is no pure Y anymore. There is only X plus, some Y. Is that a thinking in evolution or anthropology?
Well, I believe so. Again, it's not my principal area, but from what I've read, yeah, that is a new view. So whereas in the classic model, Darwinian model, we're talking about divergence, common ancestor leading to two or more descendant species. Um, there is also convergence, which is quite fascinating, and it's all over the place in animal evolution, certainly. But also there is a mixing between different, not necessarily different species, although of course that can happen. If you classify, it all comes down to how you classify things in the first place. But with Neanderthals, which are classified as Neanderthalensis, and modern humans, which are classified as sapiens, then you have two species interbreeding and producing successful offspring. Although, again, obviously the sapiens species predominated.
Yeah.
So that I think the most you can have now of Neanderthal genetic material is what is it, 7 or 8%, maybe something like that. And of course, some individuals don't have any. So
Yes. Let me ask you one last question, Gregory. So you have done a lot of research on this. So based on everything that you have seen, heard, analyzed, what odds would you put that Floresiensis, if I can pronounce it properly, um, existed, number one, and number two, if they existed, they are still potentially around in the island of Flores. What odds would you put on those things?
well, I think the idea that they existed as a distinct species, something very different from Homo sapiens, is a sure thing. The only reason for some doubt is an interpretation which was put forward not long after the discovery, uh, which argued that the type specimen, the main specimen of Homo floresiensis, was a human being who had been and not that old, geologically speaking, a human being who suffered from microcephaly, which
Mm.
is a congenital condition, of course, whereby a child is born with a very small brain.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, no, it's definitely
There is some mosquito carried thing also that babies are born with small heads, I think, right?
yes, I believe that was a Zika.
Zika virus, yeah. Yeah.
What was it now? Yeah. So, but that's been that has been quite effectively dismissed. That
Mm.
interpretation, which was, and again, as a cultural anthropologist, this fascinates me too. That was rather ideologically motivated. The idea that there was no separate species
Mm.
of harm in Indonesia. But no, I probably don't need to say any more about that. So we can be certain, I think,
Yeah.
certain as we can be that Homo floresiensis is a separate species from Homo sapiens. As regards, how long they survived on
Mm.
Flores, we don't. We don't know at the same time. And this is really what got me going with the book Between Ape and Human. What really got me going was the fact that I was recording these stories, reports, accounts. Which term you use, of course, it's kind of colors how you understand these things. If you say stories, it sounds like a probable fiction, right? Where the report is a bit different. Um, but anyways, I began hearing these and recording them well before the discovery of Homo floresiensis. So,
Yeah.
among other things, that there is no possibility that what people were telling me they'd seen was in any way influenced by news reports, for example,
Mm.
of the find of Homo floresiensis. So that was important for kind of going ahead with this. And otherwise, as you said earlier, there's no biological reason why the Floresiensis couldn't survive for a few 10,000s of years past the what's
Mm.
currently the extinction date is so the only date that they have for the species, and survived to recent times.
Yeah.
No biological reason at all. And indeed, if I'm looking for ways, as I was, of course, in the book, that's what the book's all about.
Mm.
If I was looking for ways to explain what people said they'd seen, then the best explanation is most parsimonious explanation is that they were seeing something. They really saw something real that corresponds closely to the reconstruction of Homo floresiensis. I'll point out as well that subsequent research on Flores has subsequent excavations have shown that Floresiensis and their ancestors have been present on the island for very much longer than 60,000 years ago, even going back to something in the vicinity of 1 million years ago. So in that regard, they're quite a successful species.
Yeah.
How far that may have changed when Homo sapiens came along, much more recently, we can't know, but it's pretty certain.
Yeah.
Very
Homo
likely there
sapiens.
was an overlap between the two species on Flores.
Yeah. Homo sapiens. Like a bulldozer. Wherever they go, they basically bulldoze anything else that was there before. I am fond of saying Homo sapiens are very good killing machines,
Uh-huh.
there's a good reason why we are here and most of other Homo species have left.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd entirely agree with that. I think, the bulldozer analogy certainly applies to modern industrial, very modern culture, where whole forests indeed are bulldozed down. Human beings are aggressive as well and can and do kill. At the same time, they're a little bit rational. Um, and they tend mostly, I think, to kill other humans or hominoids when they think it's in their interest to do so. People in Africa kill chimpanzees particularly when they raid their gardens, right? Steal their food. But whether apart from that there's any killer instinct, I would say not. No, we need to be a bit reasonable as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have lasted this long. But no, it has been assumed, of course, that as soon as Homo sapiens arrived on Flores, they would have, if they encountered Homo floresiensis, they would have immediately tried to wipe them out. Um, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah, let's be optimistic. Excellent, Gregory. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
Well, thanks for the invite. Thank you.
Thank you.